I'm Anna Einarsdottir. I'm a senior lecturer here in the Management School, and it gives me a real pleasure to introduce Alice Maynard for this session today. Now, Alice is a non-executive director, coach, and a business advisor. She has net roles with HMRC, FCA, and Transport for London. She also runs a small company coaching and advises businesses on inclusive practice. Now, Alice has told me she will be speaking for about 20 to 30 minutes. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Alice. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Hello, everybody, and welcome, and thank you very much for coming. I much appreciate it. Anna has introduced me formally, so I'm just going to crack on. I did my MBA, just as a bit of pre-spiel, I did my MBA in 1991. And that was a year when Peter Drucker and Warren Bennis and Tom Peters and John Adair and all those mega management gurus, they were all the rage. And leadership was definitely on their agenda. And one concept that I thought later in life got way too much airtime was the idea that managers do the right thing, but leaders do things right. And when I heard that repeated so often in books, by lecturers, as a young female manager who used a wheelchair and in consequence suffered from massive imposter syndrome, I felt I could never be a real leader. I didn't have the charisma, I didn't have the confidence, I didn't have the élan to be like these amazing people we were taught about. I had 10 years experience and a successful track record leading teams in a young, energetic industry and some significant achievements to show for my work. But I still didn't feel like I was a leader. And this concept fed my insecurity, and it left me with an even bigger inferiority complex. So I'm not relating this story to gain your sympathy. I'll explain a bit more later. So having failed to get a job after that MBA, I set up a consulting business with my sister. And about 25 years later, I realized that I am a leader. And because I've led small teams, I've led one at Network Rail that was only 2 other people. I led more than that at my previous jobs in the IT industry. I've led young professionals and I've achieved big visions for organizations. I've led large organizations like Scope, developing revolutionary strategies, overseeing their implementation, changing cultures and seeing the results of that. And I've been part of leadership teams, leading transformation in organizations, making a positive difference to employees, customers, and wider stakeholder groups. I couldn't have done that if I hadn't also been a manager of a reasonable level of competence, a manager of people, of things, and of processes. So what I would like to say at the very start is please set aside any nonsense that you might have swallowed that puts leaders on a pedestal and just let's get cracking. So the important question is not, can I be a leader, but what kind of leader do I want to be? So do you want to be a visionary leader? Do you want to be a results-orientated leader? Do you want to be appreciated by your people? There's all sorts of different ways of being a leader. And you get to choose what you want to do. The question is, whatever kind of leader that you want to be, what does that actually take? And I think it's worth reflecting on a few things. And that's where the idea of inclusive practice starts to come in. So when have you been able to be your best self at work? Certainly for me and for many of my colleagues, especially those of us who are in the minority of some description, we can be our best selves when we can take our whole self to work. When we don't have to pretend that we're not going through the menopause or pretend that we have a boyfriend when actually what we've got is a girlfriend, or pretend that we can get our job done without any of the adjustments that we actually do need to equipment or to processes. I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day, and he's someone who has a visual impairment that has gradually deteriorated as he's gone through work. And he chose not to accept it, not to admit it, not to disclose it, however you want to phrase it, initially at work. And his work suffered as a result. And his relationship with his boss suffered, and his relationship with his colleagues also suffered. And in the end, he lost his job. So the question is, can you take your whole self to work? What happens to you when you can't take your whole self to work? Reflect on, what does that do to you? Have you had experiences where you haven't been able to take your whole self to work? And what happens to you? And then ask yourself, if you work in a team, or particularly if you lead a team, can your team bring their whole self to work? And what do you think happens to them if they can't? So then let's have a bit of history. So first of all, a bit of history about me, and a couple of examples of why I think that being able to be my best self is really important to me. When I first started work, I was about to be a graduate of York, and I applied on the milk round to all the various IT companies because I decided I wanted to work in IT. And I applied to software houses because I wanted the variety of working in a software house. And I got a letter back from one of them saying, well, yes, that's all very nice, but you're a wheelchair user, so we think that you need to work in an in-house organisation, an organisation that uses computers, because then you won't have to move around, and we need to send our people all over the place, and therefore you wouldn't be able to do it properly. And I pushed back on that, and I'm forever grateful that I pushed back on that, and forever grateful that in the end they actually took me on. But when I actually got there, what I found was they didn't send me to all the various different clients. I never went to a client's premises. I had to work on in-house projects, and in-house projects kind of came and went. So there were vast periods when I was what's called in the business unsold, and that was boring. In fact, I got roundly told off for taking my knitting into work one day, but I didn't have anything else to do. Learn a computer language, they said, but there weren't any computers around in those days. That sounds a bit strange in a software house, but this was the 1980s. So we only had computers around when there were actually clients' computers. And once that job had gone out to the client, we didn't have the computer anymore. Anyway, so eventually I left that organisation because I got fed up with this, and I joined a company called Lotus. It wasn't the car manufacturer, it wasn't the toilet paper manufacturer, it was the software house. And within about 6 months of me joining Lotus, my boss said to me, there's no reason why you shouldn't go to Spain, is there, and launch the product that you've been working on. So I sort of swallowed hard and said, no, thinking, I don't know, I have no idea how I'm going to do this. But anyway, I decided to go, and my boss came with me. And when we got to the hotel, it turned out that I couldn't get into the bathroom because the doorway was too narrow, despite the fact that they told us it was an accessible room. So my boss, being a resourceful kind of guy, said, well, my bathroom, how about that? Because it's very big. And so we tripped into his bathroom, couldn't get through his bathroom door either, but his bathroom was definitely a lot bigger than mine. So he said, oh, never mind then, picked up the bathroom door, lifted it off its hinges, propped it up at the side and said, we'll swap rooms. So that for me was the difference, a huge difference between being able to be me, the person who used a wheelchair and actually, like everybody else, needed to use a bathroom, And me being someone who wasn't allowed to go out and about and be a proper employee in the office. And that for me was really important, that I could be me and people would acknowledge that I needed that kind of adjustment just to function. And then shortly before I began working with my sister, she introduced me to something called the social model of disability. And to me, that was revelatory, because for the first time, I realized I was not the problem. It wasn't me. I wasn't at fault for being disabled. So I'm going to give you a very quick, just in case people haven't come across the social model of disability. This is a way too quick summary of social model for those of you who aren't familiar. So someone like me has an impairment of some description, which means that something about us doesn't function in the same way as everybody else. But that isn't what disables us. What disables us is that the world is designed around everybody else who functions, in inverted commas, normally. And the moment the world is designed more flexibly, we're no longer disabled. So if we take a concrete example, if you hold a meeting on the first floor with no lift, I'm disabled, can't participate in your meeting. If you hold that meeting online or in a premises that has a lift, I'm not disabled because I can participate in your meeting on an equal basis to everyone else. Or if you insist on 9 to 5 working in the office, someone who has a mental health condition that means they can't handle crowds won't be able to work in your organisation. They will be disabled by your organisational processes. If you allow flexibility of travelling times, they're no longer disabled in that respect. Yeah, it gets a lot more complicated than that, but that's it in a nutshell. So equality, diversity and inclusion, people get very muddled up about these terms. And when I first started working with my sister, companies were talking about equality. This was the early 90s. And we were talking about having a level playing field, and we thought that was enough. But it soon became clear that a level playing field was not enough. People needed to be valued for their rich differences. So along came diversity. Unfortunately, diversity didn't always include everybody in all their rich differences. So, and Susan Scott Parker, who used to head up the Business Disability Forum, used to say with some frustration, there is no D in diversity. In other words, there's no disability in diversity. That wasn't quite true, but it did tend to be about women, still is often from time to time. Occasionally it was about ethnicity. Very occasionally it might be about sexual orientation, but it was almost never about disability. And then it became clear that you can value people for their rich differences. You can provide a level playing field, and still people can't function in your organisation effectively. So along came inclusion. And these days I do use the term inclusion myself, but I would say to you, don't get too hung up about the terminology. Some organisations talk about EDI, some organisations talk about inclusion, some talk about equality. I just wouldn't worry about it. It's just linguistic evolution as far as I'm concerned. And the key thing is inclusive practice, making sure that everyone can bring their whole self to work. That takes a level playing field, being valued and being included. So I started working with my sister 30 years ago. And the Equality Act, which wasn't the first piece of equality legislation on the statute book, but it's probably the first one that people recognise, is over 50 years old. So why the heck aren't we there yet? Why is it so difficult? So here are a few suggestions, and I just offer them as a kind of warning, I suppose, to say to you, beware falling into these traps. So wanting and not wanting to. So people want to do the right thing, but it's not easy to do the right thing, and they don't want to do it. When it comes to actually doing it, it often requires them giving up some power. And so people might want it, but they don't want to actually do it. Initiative-itis, I'm sure you know this from your organisations, it's prevalent everywhere, not just in equality issues. Lots and lots of projects and ideas, when sometimes what we actually need to do is a bit of standard re-engineering. Issue silos, that's Susan Scott Parker's No D in diversity. We are all lots of things. And unless we recognise that we are all lots of things, then we're going to end up getting ourselves in a knot, because we're going to try and look at one thing at once. And actually, it's never that simple. And then myths and legends. And we need to identify the ones of these that actually we believe, and maybe even we perpetuate by telling the stories. And instead, we need to tell positive, inclusive stories. So in Trump style, we need to ditch the fake news, but this time we need to ditch it for the real stuff. So if you're going to avoid those and many other traps and become a more inclusive leader, what kinds of qualities do you need to develop? Well, first off, I think you need to understand yourself better. So you need to be authentic, and that's about understanding yourself. And that's including your conscious and your unconscious thought, emotions, beliefs, and values, and acting in a way that reflects these. Because unless you first understand that and act in a way that reflects them, you can't change. If you try to change without really understanding yourself, you will stumble, if not fall. And I talked about how this is not necessarily easy, and I will come back to that. So in order to do this, you do need a level of courage. And that's about courage to change yourself and courage to do the right thing in an organisation. Sometimes when you start to do that, it can look a bit strange because people are not used to you doing something this way as opposed to that way. They've got used to you as a person that does this, and as a person who jokes about something, and then all of a sudden you don't do that anymore. And it might take some courage for you to do that. And in that, exercising that courage, you will get knockbacks. And when you get knockbacks, you're going to need to be resilient. And you're going to need to develop that level of resilience that will enable you to come back and exercise that courage again. I think you also need to develop compassion and empathy. And that's not just, in fact, it's almost not for the people within the organisation that we would normally think need compassion and empathy. It's actually for the people that are struggling to become more inclusive themselves. Or struggling with the concept that actually they're expected to become inclusive, because some people just don't really want to do this. They don't understand it. They don't know why it's there. They don't want to know about it. And that's hard. And it's really important to understand where they're coming from. Someone that I know and I am very fond of was trying to get jobs at a very senior level in about the 1990s or so, and is a white male and was sort of middle-aged-ish at the time, sort of 40s, 50s, and kept seeing those jobs going to women and was actually not very happy about it. And I can understand that. And it might be that it was unfair, but actually it's important to understand that people like that are around in the organisation, and it's important that we have compassion and empathy with them, because it is very difficult. I said earlier that some of this is about giving up power. Well, when you give up power, it can hurt. And actually, a little compassion and empathy for the people that are having to give up that bit of power, a little compassion and empathy for ourselves, because actually it can be difficult to give up our own power, is actually quite important. And then forgiveness. I think we need to be able to forgive ourselves and each other for the mistakes that we make in this. It's very, very easy to make mistakes as you are becoming more inclusive. I've made endless mistakes. I say the wrong thing. I don't do the right thing. It's very hard to do this stuff in many ways. And actually, if we don't forgive each other, and so out of that compassion and empathy needs to come that sense of forgiveness. And then we can work together for all of us to become more inclusive. But in the end, it's down to behaviours. So behaviour. We need to change, we need to make sure, we need to watch our own behaviours. We need to make sure that we are picking ourselves up when we do the right thing. We talk a lot nowadays about calling out microaggressions or whatever. We need to pick up our own as well. So we need to be watching for that. But we also, little man at the top of the green bubble there, we need to be celebrating when we get it right. So actually learn to celebrate for yourself when you get things right. So you might be looking at all this and going, yeah, but what am I actually going to do about it? I mean, all these characteristics are wonderful, but what do I do about it? And how do I go about doing it? So in case that's you, here's my very brief how-to guide. So first of all, I would say, ask yourself, what is my purpose? What am I here for? What do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? And what is my intention? So do I want to become a more inclusive leader? What kind of leader do I want to be? How does inclusion actually link into the kind of leader that I want to be? By the way, I'm not saying these are easy things to do either. And they are not things that you can do for 5 minutes in the bath. You actually do need to spend some time on this. And it's something that will continually develop over time. I have what I call my personal mission statement. I've had it for about 20 years now. It doesn't change very often, but every now and again I take another look at it and I say, is that really what I'm about? Is that really what I want to do? And then you need to understand yourself. So we're back to this business of understanding yourself so you can be authentic. How do I achieve this? What do I need to change? And how do I go about changing that? And you need actively to build your own resilience, because you will get knocked back. You'll do things wrong. You'll be pushed back by people who actually don't particularly like what you're doing. When I took on the chairmanship of Scope, I almost lost my relationship with my sister, not quite, because she did in the end understand why I was doing it. But I did actually lose some friendships in the disabled people's movement because people didn't understand what I was doing. And actually what I was trying to do was develop a more inclusive way of working between disabled and non-disabled people. So I needed real resilience with that, and I needed to exercise a level of courage. And you need to exercise that. Courage is like a muscle, and you need to exercise that courage. I mean, the little picture I showed you was of a heart. Actually, I suppose the heart is a muscle. Oh, that will do. Yeah, the heart is a muscle. So exercise that muscle, and develop your courage, and forgive others for when they get it wrong, but also forgive yourself when you get it wrong, so that you can move on, so that you can exercise that courage once again. And constantly check, what kind of vibes am I giving off? Am I giving off the kind of vibes that say, I want to be inclusive, I want people to be able to bring their whole selves to work, this is really important to me? And the kind of vibes that let people give you feedback, because you need that feedback to know whether your behaviours are landing well. If you don't get that kind of feedback, how do you ever know that your behaviours are landing effectively? And remember that I said we're all leaders, so even if you're not identified by your organisation as a leader, you can be one. In that spirit, think about the culture of your organisation and take these steps. Sweep the corners. Actually, when I was writing this, it reminded me of the security announcements when you're sitting on the train. If you see something that doesn't look right, so if you see something that doesn't look right, don't sweep it under the carpet. Sweep it out and look at it, and get everybody else to look at it too and change it. Measure it so that you can genuinely seek improvement and know if you're achieving it. Because if you don't measure it, you're not going to know if you're achieving it. But don't just measure it for measuring its sake. There are organisations that count everything, but actually it doesn't make any difference in the end to what they do, because it's not in order to become more inclusive, it's in order to, I don't know, tick the public sector equality duty box or something. And constantly ask, can we all bring our whole selves to work? So notice that when I talked earlier, I didn't say become an inclusive leader. I said become a more inclusive leader. Because I'm not sure there is ever a journey's end. And certainly if there is, I haven't found it yet. So when you find it, do let me know, won't you? And it's not always an easy journey. I think, I hope you've got that message by now. This McKinsey report was talking about authenticity, actually, but I nicked it. And I substituted authentic with inclusive, because I believe the same is true of inclusivity. So to be inclusive, you must be unrelenting in elevating and stimulating debate about uncomfortable truths and tensions you may be tempted to sweep under the rug. So the question I would have for you is, are you ready for the journey? Because it may not always be easy, but I think it's an absolutely wonderful journey of discovery, of self-discovery, of expanding networks, of joyful engagement with colleagues, and of performance with a purpose. And I hope that you will be prepared to share that journey with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice, for your really interesting session. We got a number of questions for you, and I'm gonna kick off with this really important one here. Start off. Question 1. Someone from the audience asks, can you share some more about challenging and changing teams, or sometimes one person's behavior? So can you share more about challenging and changing teams or personal behavior?
Okay, that's an interesting one, because part of this for me is always about role modeling. So yes, we can ask people to change their behavior, and that's where it comes to the business of don't sweep it under the rug, call it out. But if you call out your team's behaviours, and I have to say, if you manage a team, don't do that initially in front of the team. Do it privately, I would say, because it's actually, it's not a particularly inclusive thing to call someone out if they are working for you. It's not, my sense is it's not a particularly inclusive thing to call them out in front of other people. So I would take them on one side and say, I don't think that behaviour is very appropriate. But if you are not displaying appropriate behaviours, if you are not welcoming other people and letting other people know that you welcome feedback from them and that you want to change yourself, then anything you do with your team is going to look and sound hollow. And they are soon going to start questioning whether or not you really mean it and whether you're just picking on them. So I would say start with yourself. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to get the message across today about starting with yourself, because then you can move on to saying to other people, asking other people about changing.
Thank you, Alice. There's a second one here, and you partly touched on this earlier, but this person asks, how do you counter organizations who see inclusive leadership as a nice to have rather than a need to have?
I would say, do you want your organization to perform at its best? Most people do. And if you need your organisation to perform at its best, unless your organisation is staffed with robots, excuse me, I just need a drink. Hold on. Apologies. Unless it's entirely automated and there is no human being involved, then one of the best ways to get performance out of your people is to exercise inclusive practice and enable them to bring their best self to work. So for me, it isn't, if you want an organisation to perform, this is not an option. I don't know if that actually answers the question, but that would be my answer.
Thank you, Alice. I think it does. Here's another one making a comment. Thank you for a very interesting and important session. And this person asked if you would be prepared to share your personal mission statement with us.
Yep, I can do that, I think. Just give me a second. Once upon a time, I would not have done this, but actually these days, I think I'm trying to get bolder these days about doing this kind of thing. So bear with me. And where are we? Hang on a second. There we go. So that is my personal mission statement. So now in reading that, you need to be aware of my personal characteristics, actually. So one of them is that I'm a Christian. So my faith is quite important in my personal mission statement for me. But for me, this is about understanding what I'm actually trying to achieve in the work that I do. And I try to weave this into all my jobs. So so I chair the people committees in 2 of my jobs. And I'm also involved quite strongly in the customer service side in 2 of my jobs. And it's also what I do with my coaching side, where I coach people. I coach them and engage in kind of inclusive leadership practice, and try to help them to understand what their own purpose is and how that applies to their own work. So that was my personal mission statement.
Lovely, Alice. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We have questions flying in fast now. We have another one of a different kind here. This person asks, why is it that gender and ethnicity take precedence over disability? Are they easier to address?
I think it stems from, I mean, I think in a way they are easier to address. I was around, I was doing this work first in the 90s, before the Disability Discrimination Act came in. And at the time, there was a fairly strong social view that, certainly amongst, there was a very strong political view that disability was not a discrimination issue. And I think people still find it difficult sometimes to understand that disability is a discrimination issue, that there are discrimination issues in disability. And I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is that we still don't really recognise that disabled people can be productive, engaged employees. We still feel somehow that disabled people will need to be compensated for in some way. There's this kind of a compensation culture around disability, and that means that whereas we kind of accept that, well, not always, actually, I was going to say, we accept that women can perform and be as productive as everyone else, but actually there are still questions around that in relation to pregnancy and motherhood and so on, where people would still say, actually, I mean, they wouldn't say this out loud, but they would still say, I'd rather have a man because actually a man won't go off and have children. Some of them do say it aloud. I used to take an equality journal which used to list all the discrimination cases in the back, and it was quite shocking how overt some of the some organisations are around their discrimination issues. Truly shocking. And I think disability just suffers from that. Actually, these people really need our compassion. There's that kind of charitable model around that says we need fixing in some way, and therefore we can't actually be equal colleagues. We will always need some kind of compensatory thing to help us perform effectively.
Alice, I'm going to keep you on the same subject on disability. Here's another question from the audience. This person asks, we have a specific aim to improve the way we employ people with disabilities in terms of attraction, recruitment, etc. But really in terms of providing an excellent employment practice experience, what advice would you have as we embark on that goal? Big question.
So what advice would I have as they embark on? I'm wondering if I can find it in the chat, because I didn't quite, it was a big question and I didn't quite pick all of it up.
Just at the very end, just at the
very end, right, hold on. Right, okay. Okay, I would say that the thing you most need to focus on in practical terms is your reasonable adjustments process. You can call them, I'm sorry, I use the term reasonable adjustments because that's the legal terminology, and that was kind of where I developed my understanding of it. Many people just call it workplace adjustments, and actually the best workplace adjustment process allows anybody to get the kind of adjustment that they need to, whether that's to processes, equipment, that will enable them to do the best possible job. This is about bringing your best self to work again. And the one thing that I see in lots of organizations that I work in is where people fall down on the disability stuff is that understanding of adjustments and how easy they are to make and how appropriate it is to make them and so on. So that's number one. And number two, when you've got sophisticated about your reasonable adjustments process, I would then say, get good at performance management in general. Organizations are notoriously bad, I think, at performance management. And it gets very, very confusing around the law and reasonable adjustments, certainly, but the quality in general when it comes to performance management. Because if you're not very good at it, and that stems from not being particularly good at inclusive practice, if you're not good at performance management, then people are going to experience negative things from your performance management processes. So I'd say start looking at your reasonable adjustments process, make it best in class. There's plenty of good examples out there about it. And then that applies across the whole employee life cycle. And then get good at, well, preferably simultaneously, but it is a big ask, get good at performance management and learn to understand the boundary between the two.
Thank you, Alice. There's a question here again, but from a different perspective. This person asks, so from other members' perspective, what do they value the most towards their leader?
What do people value the most towards their leader from?
So for other people in the organization, what do they most value in a leader?
I think my answer would be you have to ask them. I don't know what people value most in a leader. I know what I value most in a leader, and that is them actually taking their people with them, which means enabling them to take their whole self to work, engaging effectively with their teams or their organizations. That's what I would value, but I don't know what other people value. That's possibly not the answer that was expected, but there we go.
Alice, I'm aware of the time clock ticking. I just wanted to ask if you're okay to carry on until 5, as we have a lot of questions and people are really engaged.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll keep firing away the questions. So we have one here who asks about your thoughts about active bystander initiatives. Do they really work? Do they actually change the culture?
Well, I'm going to shock everybody by saying I don't know what active bystander initiatives are. The concept of initiative-itis comes up actually when you talk about something initiatives. I always go, ooh, initiatives, that's interesting. I can, unless there is something very technical about that, my take from the terminology would be that it's back to what I said about calling out behaviours. That actually what matters, I think, is that you first look to your own. So I would say, am I my question is always, am I doing this? Am I being an active bystander? Sorry, I'm going to get awfully philosophically tied up in this question, because the whole concept of bystander is a bit strange, because the concept of a bystander for me, the connotations of a bystander are that you stand by and don't really do anything. And so the active bystander is a kind of a contradiction in terms. So I'm not sure I can say anything very particularly useful about this. I shall look it up later. How about that?
Good answer. Good answer. Moving on, there's the question here about, so what do you do when an organization positions itself as inclusive, but when hard times come, they're not that really flexible as they say?
I would question whether their leadership, and I mean the senior leadership, is actually serious about inclusion. So there are two things here. One is that I am a very strong advocate of boards role modelling the behaviours that they want to see in their organisation. So that's number one. I think you have to role model what you want to achieve. And the second thing is that actually they need good information about what's going on in the organisation, because it's difficult to, if it's a very large organisation, if the channels of communication are not effective from the front line to the senior management, then they're not going to know what's going on in the organisation. So they need to, part of becoming a more inclusive organisation is about clearing out those channels of communication so that they work more effectively, so that you do actually know what's going on. But that can take time. And so those two things of what do we want and how are we going to demonstrate that we are doing what we say we want, and how do we find out if other people are doing what we say we want, are the two things that I think the senior management team in that kind of organisation would need to be asking themselves.
Alice, I want to ask you here a question, one about, it's actually questioning your question. So the question, what kind of leader do you want to be, seems to involve a great deal of reflexivity. And this person wonders how much thought leaders give to this question and to what extent the outcome is within their control.
I think it's probably very varied. I suspect some possibly don't allow themselves the time. Some don't have what I would call thinking partners. I mean, throughout my career, since certainly for the last 20 years, I've had a bit more than that actually. I've had a number of coaches, and I think of them as my thinking partners. So they help me to work out where I am and what I'm doing and what kind of person I'm becoming and what I need to change. And they're from all different sorts of, they're in all sorts of different ways, but they help me a lot to do that thinking. I think there are some leaders who do a lot of that kind of thinking, and there are some who don't do very much at all. And I think in terms of the outcome, what I would say is that you cannot, I mean, it's a classic thing to say, this is not my idea, this is not my concept, but you can you cannot control the events that happen around you. You can't control the things that happen to you. So you can't control, for instance, you couldn't control coronavirus. Nobody could control coronavirus. But you can control your response to it. And if you are a senior leader, you can influence and control to some extent your organization's response. So I think for me, it's about understanding that the outcome, which is a kind of a combination of an event and your response, is not entirely within your control, but it's largely within your control, because the response is the critical thing to the event. I hope that made sense.
Yes, thank you. We probably have time for maybe a couple of more questions, and here's one. Do you think that working from home, virtual environment, is helping the leveling the playing field in some areas, and perhaps the commitment to allowing staff to work from home on an ongoing basis may break down barriers?
Okay, I think it's breaking down a lot of barriers in a lot of ways, and I think it's creating a few. One of the things that I've noticed in my own work and amongst colleagues is that there's a lot more work. So I actually wrote a piece on my first article I wrote on LinkedIn was around the Zoom environment, as it were, and the fact that you don't have to travel now from one meeting to another. So I don't have to go from Stratford to Westminster in order to get from one meeting to another. When I have space and time to reflect, it's just relentless. It's one meeting after the other. You stop one at 2, you start one at 2, you stop it at 3, you start another one at 3. And people are in back-to-back meetings all day. And whereas they might have been in back-to-back meetings in their headquarters building, they probably had to walk down a corridor. And it's remarkable how much even just walking down the corridor makes a difference to you. So that's my number one, where it's creating some barriers. My number two is actually not everybody's home environments are conducive to working from home. So in the organisations I'm with, we have tried to ensure that where people don't have a very good home environment to work from home, they are the sort of second cohort that is allowed to go back to the office once we manage to get that COVID safe. And the third thing is that actually from a disability perspective, some people don't find this kind of environment particularly helpful. I very much doubt there's anyone who's deaf out there listening to this, because it's not great. I mean, it might be okay from a lip syncing, lip reading perspective, but my picture would have been very small when I was showing my slides, and it would have been incredibly difficult, and I don't think we've got captions on. So that's quite an excluding thing. And there will be other people who are not good at looking at screens. Some of my meetings are audio only. Actually, I'm rubbish at paying attention to the audio only. And so I have to find things to do with my hands in order to be able to concentrate on listening. So I think it's great in some ways, but we haven't learnt yet how to make it as great as it could be.
Certainly food for thought here, Alice, about management of virtual events and about how we make them accessible and inclusive, which I think many of us fail on repeatedly. I'll finish on this question, which has to do with the followers. So this person is asking, in addition to thinking about the leadership and creating good condition for productivity and bringing oneself, whole self, to work, are there good followership characteristics?
Yeah, I think there are some good follow-ups. Interesting question. Yeah, I think there are some, and forgiveness would be one of them, and courage would be another. And personally, I think self-awareness is good for everybody, but that's me. So I definitely think that courage and forgiveness are important, because we need to forgive our leaders when they get it wrong. If we don't, then they are going to retreat. They're not going to be able to exercise that courage muscle unless they've got bags and bags of resilience. And it's not really very fair not to forgive them if they screw up. I want to be forgiven when I screw up, please. So I think I owe that to the chairs of my boards, and the people that I work alongside.
Alice, I think that brings us to the end of the session. I'd just like to thank you very much for being so inspirational, for sharing your thought. You raised a lot of questions that made us think. You shared, we felt it was really bold. You shared your mission statement, so thank you very much for that. I found it certainly helpful, and I hope for the audience found it as helpful as I did. I think without further ado, I think that probably brings us to the closing of the session, but I'll hand it over to Peter to say a few words.
Peter, do you need me to put the last slide up?
Oh, that would be good. Just a little bit of advertising for us. Yeah.
See if I can find it. If I go back.
It's meant we could see clear pictures of you and when you're talking, so no, it's a good idea to bring it down. I haven't got much to add. It's been a brilliant session, Alice. Thank you very much. Apologies to those people who asked questions and we just couldn't get through them all. There's been so many people on this session and so many great questions. It's been great. So just to say to people, thank you very much for attending. Do come to our future sessions, whether they're part of this Equality Matters series that runs roughly monthly, or any of our other presentations, and do feel free to share the events that come up. But Alice, we've taken up so much of your time and given you such a flurry of questions, and brilliantly handled. So I just want to add my thanks and just say I think I'll just let you. I was going to say you're going to display that, but I'll just end here. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much, Alice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate all those questions. And please feel free to get in touch with me on my I've got a website. It was on the bottom of the slides, and please feel free to get in touch with me if you want to ask some of your questions individually.